You're listening to the Paul Harrell Program, brought to you by Conduit Media Group.
Hey, folks, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Paul. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We're building a liberty machine, and we're glad that you're with us today. Hey, the phone number, if you want to contribute today, you can call me or text me, 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. We do have a lot of news to get to. Certainly update on the executions from last night, as well as the one more to come later this week, and a bunch of other stuff in between. But we've been doing these things, you guys know, called the Impression of the Session, with as many legislators really as we can get on the program. And I want to introduce you to one who's coming on now, is State Representative Greg Leding. He is a Democrat from Fayetteville. And Greg, welcome to the program, sir.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right, so feel free to make most everybody they kind of make opening statements. So you feel free. You can be as long or as brief as you want. In general, what was your impression of the session 2017?
The most different of the ones that I've served. I mean, I came in 2011. The last time Democrats had a majority, it was a slim majority, and this was the first session we were in a super minority. So. Tried to make sure I had a proper mindset before going into session. I knew I didn't want to go down and do nothing, right? I mean, if you're going to, I live in Fayetteville. It's about 3 hours away from the Capitol. I've got a wife and a 13-month-old daughter. If I'm going to be spending that much time away from them, I want to be a part of governing. But obviously, in this political climate, I was going to have to look for ways to work with colleagues across the aisle, and I think I was pretty successful. This was actually one of my most productive sessions in terms of legislation. I worked with the Republican chair of the House Revenue and Tax Committee to actually pass a tax relief bill for teachers. I worked with Senator Alan Clark and Representative Nikki Gates on a bill to help reduce cancer rates among firefighters. I worked with Republican Senator Lance Eads in Springdale on a bill to protect student athletes. And I put together what I think was a pretty broad coalition, both politically and geographically, on a bill to get insurance companies to help cover oral chemotherapy the same way they do other forms of chemotherapy. Arkansas was one of just 8 states where that wasn't the case. And specifically, I reached out to Republican Senator Greg Standridge from Russellville, because I know that right now he's fighting his own battle against cancer, and he agreed to carry the bill in the Senate, and we were ultimately successful in getting that passed. So for me, I think it was a successful session, and honestly, I think overall it was a pretty good session. Obviously, I have a lot of constituents here in Fayetteville that aren't too pleased, particularly ones on campus, with the passage of House Bill 1249.
I would imagine, yeah.
But but that's just what happens. When you're in the minority, and hopefully we can work to, hopefully there'll be no issues, right? Hopefully that legislation will do what Representative Collins intended to do, and there won't be any problems. But if there are, hopefully we can all work together to address them. And certainly Representative Collins has said over and over that he'll work to address anything if this does cause unintended problems.
Did you find it?
Otherwise,
go ahead. Sorry.
Otherwise, I think it was a really rather peaceful session, especially considering, dust-ups the last couple cycles over, the private option / Arkansas Works.
You mentioned 1249. You mentioned, basically the campus carry bill, the gun bill.
Right.
Were you familiar with any of the process behind that? Let me ask you, did you think it was odd that the NRA got on board that bill and then the correction legislation that came right after it, they had to come out against? I mean, that whole process, do you have any comment on that?
I didn't necessarily find it surprising. I mean, obviously, the NRA, just like any lobbying group, has an interest, and they were pushing it. And I don't obviously know why they made the decision to oppose Senate Bill 726. I forget the number now, but the legislative fix that we passed there at the very end. Maybe it was just as simple as they thought they had gained more ground than they'd expected with 1249, and they didn't want to give it up. But I'm not sure why they came out and opposed it. But we learned, obviously, that the Southeastern Conference has at least maybe a little more influence on that particular issue.
Yeah, they certainly do. Outside groups certainly do in that case. I will say the NRA guy, I learned kind of through the grapevine, the only reason they got on board 1249, which created a second-tier license, which required additional training. They were opposed to that like a week earlier. And then because of the potential to carry, at a football stadium and that sort of thing, that's actually what got them on. That was the one thing from what I hear that actually got them on board with it. So when they immediately come back and try to take that away, I feel like that's that kind of explains why they were against it. Obviously, if that was the one
so
token
they might have felt like they were right, a little bit of a betrayal. Or something. I'm honestly not convinced that there was a plan to remove the stadiums, even as late as when Governor Hutchinson signed the bill. I didn't really sense any kind of movement there until the national media started making quite a bit of noise. But again, I wasn't privy to a lot of those conversations. Well,
yeah, and I mean, at the signing, not to get too focused on this one subject, but at the signing, Governor Hutchinson signed it, and then Senator Dismayne came up in that press conference and talked about the amendment he was working on, to address some concerns. We're talking with State Representative Greg Leding. So you said in your opening statement that this was the most productive that session that you've had. And so given the massive Republican majorities and given the fact that you're a Democrat, did you expect to be this productive when you went down there this time?
Not necessarily, but I certainly didn't want to admit defeat before I'd even started. And even during my first term, when Democrats were still in the majority, I worked very hard to establish good relationships with people across the aisle because I've never believed that any one party or group has a monopoly on good ideas. And, even when, again, we were working with 54 Democrats that first term, you probably weren't ever going to get all 54, right? So you're probably going to still need some Republican votes. And that was something I've just continued to try to do because I honestly am less interested about whether an idea is thought of as a Republican or a Democratic idea as I am just whether or not I think it's a good idea. And I think the state is probably better served when we consider multiple viewpoints. Obviously, when the people put in one party in power to the extent that they have the Republican Party right now, I think those ideas should win the day more often than not. But I don't think that means that other ideas should be discarded without at least some conversation. So just for me, it was all about reaching out and finding, again, issues that aren't partisan. I mean, I don't think a single bill that I passed could be considered a partisan bill. I did file some legislation that could be seen that way, but I either ended up not running it or it died a pretty quick death.
I've had some Democrats down there, they tell me confidentially that from their standpoint, they don't feel like Republicans are necessarily governing like the majority party down there. And I didn't know if you agree with that. And that was in the context of how the whole committee process shook out when you guys ended up with 11, then 10 Democrats on one of the most powerful committees that you're on, the House Revenue and Tax Committee.
I do think there are some divisions in the Republican caucuses, but I think that's just natural. There were divisions when the Democrats had such strong majorities. It's tough to get that many people together and have everybody agree on the same thing. And I don't think everybody should agree, right? If all 135 legislators down there think the same way, then 134 of them aren't necessary. It was a little surprising, honestly, that we were able to at least temporarily pull off that majority on House Revenue and Tax. But obviously, yeah, the gambit ultimately failed because we lost a member, ended up just with a tie on that committee, and I think we probably forced the Speaker's hand in changing the rules for future sessions. So I'm really not sure it was worth it. But it was, when you're in the minority, you are looking for whatever point of leverage you can gain, right? And that seemed to be one that made the most sense. And honestly, I could talk for a long time about how all that went down, but just to be really brief about it, our plan within the first couple of votes completely fell apart. The only way we were able to establish, again, just a temporary majority on that committee was there was a Republican lawmaker in the 4th District Caucus who was steering freshman Republicans away from that committee. I guess, not realizing what we were trying to do, or thinking it wouldn't necessarily matter. And that is, I mean, I guess in his defense, not to blame this poor soul, but that is one of the committees where the chair does have a little bit more say on what legislation actually going to run.
Yeah.
So, to really have any kind of leverage in that committee, we probably should have had 14 or 15 members, and that was never going to be possible. One
of the key points of the session, the key debates, was over Senate Bill 140, the Senator Jake Files legislation to, tax the internet, tax out-of-state sellers, try to figure out a way to expand our authority to where we can make them when they don't have a nexus in our state. Talk a little bit about the Democrats' role there. You guys were able to block that really up until the end, and specifically if you can address the amendment on SB 140, because I was in the room and I thought you guys were going to get it passed. There were 10 votes, and needed 11, and then it got to you, and you didn't vote on that, and it made, I think, one of your colleagues kind of mad because she got up and left right after that. So tell us that whole process, because about why you didn't want to support that amendment.
I am not wild about hostile amendments. I think it's got to be a very special circumstance for you to try to do that to a sponsor. So I was never really supportive, but again, they are my caucus, and we did gain a majority on that committee for a reason. So early on, I did vote with them, at least in not getting the bill out of committee and keeping it bottled up in committee, but I was never really on board for the amendment. But yeah, that was a risk I took, angering some caucus members. I know Senator Files was appreciative. But my point, or my feeling was, that final vote was one of the very last days of session. Only like 2 days after that. And my point to my colleagues was, look, you fought, you tried. These things that you're trying to, through the amendment, divert money to, unless the bill passes, the money's not going to be there to do those things, right? So let's at least get this to the House floor and see what our other colleagues have to say. And ultimately the bill lost by, I think, 7, 8, maybe 9 votes.
Yeah, and there's talk of it maybe coming up in the special session again. Have you heard anything about that? You think it's possible?
I certainly think it's possible. I mean, the state, I think, could use the revenue. Obviously, Walmart is important in the state, and I know they would like to see the bill passed, but so would a lot of cities who are hurting, and a lot of small businesses. And I think anytime that you get independent, small mom-and-pop businesses, on Main Street, pushing for the same things that Walmart's pushing for, it's at least worth talking about, because those aren't
or at least,
that generally,
or at least pointing out the contradiction that when is Walmart ever for mom-and-pop stores? So something certainly worth talking
something
about.
Might be,
Have you guys gotten the call? Have you guys gotten the call for the special session yet?
Unless it's come this afternoon, I don't think so. I was out of state over the weekend for a conference.
Okay.
I do think it made the news last week that the governor was planning on calling it, but I don't think I've received the official call.
Can't get real quick. I know we're running out of time. I got a couple more questions, but the quest for revenue. There's a lot of bills that increase in tire taxes, creation of new tire tax, of course the internet sales tax, the gasoline sales tax. I mean, these were just quests for more revenue, and when people tried to allocate it and specifically put it in a certain spot, that was met with resistance from the leadership. So, is there a budget problem? Do we need this money from somewhere else? What are your thoughts on that whole quest for revenue?
I will say that privately, I have had Republican colleagues who have said they think we might have gone not necessarily too far with tax cuts in the last couple of sessions, but we might have gotten a little ahead of ourselves. Some of the economic forecasts that we counted on when we passed that last round might have been a little too optimistic. We maybe should have proceeded a little more slowly. So there are some concerns about where we stand right now. I don't think it necessarily means we're in trouble, but there are some people who are less inclined, or at least a little more concerned about some significant tax cuts. Obviously, we did pass several tax relief bills. Again, I managed to get one passed. But I do think there's some concern about moving too quickly on some other things. I think that's one reason that Governor Hutchinson put together this Blue Ribbon Task Force, or whatever we're going to call it, to look at the entire tax code. I do think there's a lot to work with there, but I think we just have to make sure that we're doing the smart thing and do it with a little more long-term thinking.
State Representative Greg Leding, one more question because I know you got to go.
Okay.
All right, and I asked Scott Baltz, your Democrat colleague. He was on a couple weeks ago. I asked him the same question.
Okay.
So you got Senator Jake Files, who is the chair of Revenue and Tax, and he's been in the news a lot lately in a negative headline: $700,000 in liens and judgments against his company. You've got the GIF money that went to Fort Smith to build a softball complex. But then now contractors say he submitted false bids in their names. The city manager came out and said he gave Files $38,000 with no work done in a reasonable amount of time for new roofs. And then the IRS problem as well. Again, he's the chair of Revenue and Tax. You're a Democrat. He's a Republican. How come no one in the Democrat Party is calling for his resignation? What are your thoughts?
I honestly haven't followed all that closely enough to weigh in. It certainly does sound like there's something worth exploring there. But honestly, I don't know what necessarily good it would do for the few Democrats that are down there to call for his resignation. I think that's the kind of thing where it could easily just spiral into a back and forth where the parties just start attacking each other's members. I think if there truly is something, if there's truly been some wrongdoing there, authorities are going to get to it. And at that point, when we know something wrong has been done, then we can start calling for people to maybe step aside. But until there's something a little bit more concrete, I don't know that it's worth it.
Well, my only comment that I would add to that, and the reason I think this would be my motivation, because I think he should resign, because the amount of potential political leverage out there for anything he pushes, whether it's the internet tax or anything else, it's just, in my opinion, so astronomical. It's just better safe than sorry. Because I feel like it calls a lot of policy goals into question. What are we really trying to accomplish? I'll give you the last word, sir.
No, I think that's perfectly fair, and who knows? Maybe there have been some discussions in the caucus about saying something publicly. My colleagues would probably tell you I'm not the best caucus member in terms of attending meetings, but I think people are just kind of watching it play out. But you're right. If it ever got to the point where we thought there was maybe too much leverage there, or that there was just a little too much smoke for there to be no fire, I think you would see some comments come from this side of the aisle.
State Representative Greg Leding, Democrat from Fayetteville, thanks for coming on the first time. I hope we can do it again. Thanks for giving us your impression of the session.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thanks.
All righty. Be safe. Folks, we got to take a break. Back in just a moment.